p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the Afternoon Agenda on GB News with me, Alex Phillips. This show is all about your opinion and mine. It's not news as you know it, but discussion and debate on things that are or really should be on your agenda. So, with that in mind, here's what we'll be covering today. The number of migrants crossing the Channel so far this year is already double the number who attempted to reach our shores last year. We'll be live in Dover asking if Border Force efforts to tackle the crisis are working. New evidence that eating fruit, veg and having a nice cup of tea can stave off dementia. We'll ask an expert just how a so-called anti-inflammatory diet can help. And today, on Armistice Day, as we remember those who gave their lives in war, we need to talk about our veterans. Have we let our servicemen and women down? That's the agenda for the next hour. What's on yours? Email me, gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's the news headlines with Polly.
Alex, thank you. Your GB News headlines at 4 o'clock. Millions of people have observed a 2-minute silence today to remember the men and women who've lost their lives in conflict. Marked each year on the 11th hour of the 11th day on the 11th month, people across the UK pause to honour those who died in conflict. The Duchess of Cornwall joined hundreds of veterans at Westminster Abbey. Armistice Day commemorates the end of the First World War. Services will also be held on Remembrance Sunday. In other news today, Border Force officers have now intercepted at least 25 migrant boats attempting to cross the Channel today, carrying up to 50 people on each boat. It's been reported that 4 small boats have also made it to shore, landing at Deal in Kent. There's been an influx of migrants trying to reach the UK in the recent days, with 1,200 crossing the English Channel in just the last 48 hours. Tens of thousands of care home staff in England are facing job losses as COVID vaccinations for carers becomes a legal requirement from today. Staff must be double jabbed to work unless they're medically exempt. It's estimated that more than 50,000 current workers haven't received both doses, although nearly half have received a single jab. The move comes as the sector faces severe shortages, with some quitting in advance due to the new policy. Speaking to GB News, Alex Norris, Shadow Minister for Public Health and Patient Safety, said Labour had warned the government not to make this move.
We said to the government we didn't think this was a wise thing to do. We encouraged the government to use the time, because this was voted on a number of months ago before the summer, to use the time to engage with trade unions, to engage with professional bodies. They haven't done that, and I'm really worried about the impact that that's going to have on social care and then again on the NHS. But once again, it shows at the very heart of government a lack of strategic planning here, understanding of the real world, and it's all our communities that are going to suffer from that.
Meanwhile, the NHS is on its knees and... The NHS is on its knees and buckling under pressure, according to industry analysts, as waiting lists in England reach a record high. The chief executive of the NHS Confederation says the current situation is unsustainable and patient care is being compromised. While the King's Fund Health think tank said chronic workforce shortages were heaping pressure on overstretched staff. Data from NHS England shows 5.8 million people were on waiting lists at the end of September. That's the highest number since records began. And a funeral's been held for Northern Ireland veteran Dennis Hutchings in Plymouth. Hundreds of mourners lined a road, applauding, cheering and saluting as the coffin arrived at church, escorted by bikers. The 80-year-old died from COVID last month. He was awaiting a trial over a shooting in County Tyrone during the Troubles in 1974. Rotherham Council has introduced new plans to combat child sexual exploitation. It follows criticism from opposition Conservatives who said not enough was being done to tackle child grooming in the borough, which the council and South Yorkshire Police dispute. The 2014 J report revealed that 1,500 children had been abused in the town between 1997 and 2013. One survivor we're calling Elizabeth was among them. She told us about the council's plan.
Hoping that there's improvements, and there will be, but because they've been amended, I feel like they've been watered down a little bit more. I hope that Rotherham can make a stand, and I hope Rotherham can heal. Am I 100% sure that's going to happen? No.
The former president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, has died at the age of 85. The politician, who oversaw the end of the apartheid era and shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Nelson Mandela, is said to have died peacefully at his home in Cape Town. Sport, and Stephen Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambitious plans were a factor in him agreeing to become the club's new head coach. The former Liverpool and England captain has left Rangers, who he guided to the Scottish Premiership title, undefeated last season. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. And the latest biodegradable and sustainable product now available for Christmas is glitter. Ahead of the festive season, researchers from Cambridge University have found a way to make non-toxic vegan glitter from the cell walls of plants. Glitter isn't currently environmentally friendly as it's made of toxic materials and contributes to plastic pollution. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
Dulce et decorum est pro patria more. One of the most poignant lines ever written in poetry. A choking line thrown in cruel juxtaposition against the vignette of harrowing images of legions of men, many of them barely beyond boyhood, sacrificing their lives in the most revolting, hellish and inhuman of warscapes during the First World War under chlorine attack, bent like beggars. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country, wrote Wilfred Owen of The Old Lie, as he was being treated for shell shock in a Scottish hospital about the global conflict that was supposed to end all conflicts. Peace finally rang out in peals of bells across a battered and bludgeoned continent on this day, 103 years ago, the scars of which still lattice the landscape of Flanders and northern France. Yet the peace was short-lived, and the UK, as many other countries across the globe, has continued to engage in fighting at home and abroad. Today, we must all have relatives whose lives have been taken in conflict. For me, my great-grandfather, there he is, Erwin Wilcox, service number 47169, a gunner in the Royal Artillery, died more than a decade younger than I am now. His grave, a white headstone, alongside 1,724 others in the Cimetière Philosophe in Mazengarbe, France, laid out in rows in a field where the locals still tend the fallen heroes. He left a pregnant wife whose son Francis, my grandfather, would go on to join the RAF and serve in North Africa during World War II, driving munitions across the desert, too busy to take in the spectacle of the pyramids. There he is, my grandfather, Francis Wilcox. Frank's wife, Iris, my beloved grandmother, with enormous needles clenched between her teeth, sewed the canvas wings on the earliest aircraft of the Second World War at the Gloucester factory. She would tell me the tale of the rows of girls cowering under workbenches at the roar of an invading airborne attack, before a voice came over the tannoy to instruct them to get out from their shelter, as what they were hearing was the sound of the very first jet engine built by Frank Whittle, placed into the fuselage of their craft, the Gloucester E-28, which went on to become the famous Gloucester Meteor. How they cried and cheered and banged their tools on their desks with jubilation and pride. We remember them as we remember all of those who have given their lives in conflict to protect us back at home, who have duly served to advance the interests of their nation at the behest of their rulers, those who have been maimed, those who will continue to suffer psychologically, physically, and socially. Yet while we extol the significance of the 11th minute, of the 11th hour on the 11th day, so many of those who followed in the footsteps of the millions before them who engaged in the war effort, trod on the battlefield, fought on the front line, are not remembered. Many are simply forgotten, discarded, left with life-altering injuries and psychiatric trauma. Some are found homeless, quaking in subways, swaddled in dirty sleeping bags. Some are tossing and turning, praying for respite from haunting flashbacks that sabotage their subconscious. Some are facing criminal trials for actions in conflict retrospectively judged by the standards of civil society. Some must live the rest of their lives debilitated and dependent on those who depended upon them. Today, on Armistice Day, we really need to talk about our veterans. I'm joined now by General Sir Richard Barrons, former head of UK Joint Forces Command. Wonderful to have you on, General Barrons. Do you think that in the UK we do enough to protect servicemen and women, particularly those who have actually finished service duties?
So it's a very good question. I think there are always going to be needs that haven't been met. And we should recognise that meeting those needs in this country has always been a combination of what the government does through our taxes, what the armed forces themselves do, and what the charitable sector does. And we should recognise that a lot of citizens of the UK have been really generous in the way they support the Poppy Appeal and other service charities. But this will never finish. There will always be veterans who grow old, have different needs, have different mental health and other crises. So we need to make sure that this is a constant, vigilant process.
How important is Armistice Day as part of that process to remind us of those who have made what many call the ultimate sacrifice, and to also make citizens think about how we've got to where we are and our past history?
So this is a really important day. I think it's absolutely essential that at one day in the year, the nation pauses to think about the whole business of war. So the veterans, the soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines are clearly the shop window of this, and it's there in their day. But actually, we all need to think about war because it has marked the history of our country. We should recognise that war isn't just about military people. If you look at the First and Second World War, it left a remarkable, frankly, we'll find we have no choice. And when that happens, it will be as terrible as any other war, even if the technology is different.
2021 has perhaps been a particularly poignant year. We've seen trials of soldiers who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. We've also seen the pretty catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, with many of those who stood shoulder to shoulder with our servicemen and women in that country, stranded and not always able to get back to the UK. What does that say about us as a nation when it comes to honouring those who take part in military duty?
So you make two very good points. The first issue is no British service person would expect to do their job illegally. We are always going to be subject to the laws and values of our country. And where we're not, we should expect to be held to account. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. But when we are held to account, it must be fair. It can't be so late in life that the witnesses no longer exist or are old and frail themselves and the facts can't be established. And I think the tail end of the Northern Ireland process had got into that territory. I know not everyone agrees. And the second issue you raise is just as important. So we decided to conclude the campaign in Afghanistan, and we left, and 453 British servicemen died during that 20-year campaign. And we should reflect on that. But we should also reflect, and this is today's business, that because we stopped, something like 23 million Afghan citizens are genuinely facing the prospect of dying from starvation and cold as a result of this campaign concluding. And that, I think, is a responsibility that we and many others in the world now need to take much more seriously.
General Sir Richard Barons, I'm honoured to have you on my programme today on Armistice Day. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm pleased to say I can now speak to Dr. Johnson Behari, who was awarded the Victoria Cross in 2005, the highest award for gallantry given to members of the British military for extreme heroism. It really is an honour to be speaking to you today on Armistice Day. How important is Armistice Day to you and your former colleagues?
It's a very important day for me as a sovereign soldier still in the British Army. Today we mark 103 years of and celebrate this great day, of the men and women that lay their life down, sacrifice their life for us. And I myself been in a similar position, and I was one of the lucky few to come back alive. So it's a very important day for me, not only remembering the fallen and the sacrifice was made 100 years ago, First and Second World War, at the Falklands Island, but in my time as well. Our time in Iraq was not the easiest. Afghanistan was a pretty rough time for us. So although we remember the past, we still need to remember the present.
You are remarkably the first living soldier in nearly half a century to be awarded the Victoria Cross. You really are a hero. How honoured were you to receive that? How important was that to you personally?
It was the proudest day of my life, standing in front of the boss, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, to receive the Victoria Cross. As a soldier in the British Army, we don't go out and say, right, we in battle, and our aim is to come back with the Victoria Cross. We go out there and do our job 100% to our ability. Some get recognized and some don't. And today I sit here proudly wearing my Victoria Cross, remembering those that didn't come back, those what was there with me, but those that haven't been recognized that probably do the same job like myself.
There were reports throughout the First and Second Gulf Wars about fairly catastrophic underfunding or ill-equipment of our armed forces. Do you think our military is in better shape today? Do you think we have a good, robust armed forces, or are there still huge gaps where people like you and your colleagues actually struggle in the theatre of war when they're put in active combat?
I mean, I could only speak about my time in the service, and my time in service, I was equipped. I was out there doing my job with the equipment that was given to us. And yeah, we had improvement. So when we went out, the equipment we had, it was deemed that we needed improvement. And then the improvement came to us on the front line. So you would always find room for improvement. You're fighting war every day. Or, when we do come to that point, we have the equipment, but then we have to adjust to suit the situation as well.
What is it like serving on the front line, and how easy is it to adapt back to normal life when you get home?
For me, it's very easy, and I think many soldiers would say the same, or anyone from the armed forces. The minute time you put on your uniform, we have many different uniforms, and each uniform you put on you have a different reaction. So like today, I'm in my blues. I celebrate the fallen, and I stand proud alongside servicemen and veterans remembering the fallen. But I get into combat, and the focus is different. It changed. We now is day to work and do our job. So, and before you deploy, you will do the training for the situation you're going into. So you would be prepared going in.
And do you believe that the young men and women who are just joining the armed forces today have a good and long career ahead of them? Or have you come across people who've had a pretty tough time in the military?
The military is a very tough environment. It's not for the half-hearted, it's for the individual who want to do the job. And there is, I would say, everyone who signed the dotted line, think about it carefully and sign the dotted line to serve our country. And serving our country is a dangerous job. We know what we're putting ourselves in. And our job is to protect and serve. So my job, every time I step out my house, is to make sure that no citizen is in harm. And I will stand firm and take that bullet for them.
Dr. Johnson Bahari, amazing words. An absolute honour to have you. And, you know, everyone in the UK has great respect and great thanks for your service to our country. Thank you so much. Dr. Johnson Bahari there with a Victoria Cross for his heroism. Well, let's talk to Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory, CEO of SSAFA, the Armed Forces Charity. Lieutenant General Sir Gregory, do you think that the Armed Forces, especially when it comes to the aftercare of veterans, do you think they are doing everything that they should be doing?
Alex, good afternoon. I will answer your question. Just before I do so, thank you for having this feature. I think it's really important. Thank you also for sharing some of your own family history, because the importance of Armistice Day is about both the nation remembering, but also individuals reflecting on what members of their families have done. I think we've heard some really wise words, both from General Richard Barrons and Dr. Johnson Bahari, really wise words. And Richard said, support for veterans is a fusion of government, the armed forces and service charities. And he's absolutely right. And Dr. Johnson Bahari said that while he had adapted well when he came home, what we find in SAFA, the Armed Forces Charity, and SAFA stands for Soldiers, Sailors, Airmen and Families Association, is some adapt well and some struggle. And we are there for those that may, for whatever reason, have a difficulty in their lives, as we have been for 137 years.
We hear quite often about the sort of aftercare that veterans may need, whether it be physical care, if they've been maimed in war, if they've lost limbs, but also these other aftershocks such as PTSD and things that could lead to homelessness. Can you talk a little bit about that and why perhaps that might be a problem for those people who have served in the military?
As Johnson Bahari said, people in the military are put in very dangerous and challenging circumstances. That is part of what men and women sign up for, and they do it very well. And people will react to the challenges they face and the circumstances they've come across differently. Some will be able to cope, and I think they cope particularly well because of the team spirit that exists in the armed forces, people working for each other, and because of the training. But some will struggle either immediately or later. One of the challenges we find in SAFA is too often military people are too proud rapidly to admit they've got a problem. They bottle it up and they try and cope with it themselves. So one of my messages to your listeners would be, if you know of somebody in the military who may not be coping as well as others, please get them, or please get their permission to refer them to a charity like SAFA. We don't have all the answers, but we can talk to people who do. And that reflects what they have given to the nation. What we've seen during the pandemic is an increase in the levels of distress of calls coming to our charity. Isolation, particularly from veterans missing the team ethos and the camaraderie, debt, physical and mental well-being, and homelessness, perceived or actual, and we deal with those.
On a day like today, where most Brits are proudly wearing their poppy and remembering relatives, friends, neighbours, even those unknown to us who've made the ultimate sacrifice, does it strike you as unkind? Or how do you feel when there are people who protest things like Remembrance Sunday, who protest the wearing of poppies? Or is that something that you just think, well, each to their own, but, you know, we carry on and we'll remember those who we have lost?
Part of the reason for my service and others is so that people who want to protest about things have the freedom and the right to do so. And members of the armed forces who've lost their lives would be proud that people can protest. I don't agree with the protests on that issue, but freedom of speech is something each and every member of the armed forces fights for, and we should always continue to do that.
Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory, wise words indeed. Delighted to talk to you today. Thank you so much. Well, we're continuing this conversation throughout the show, and I really want to know what you think. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and of course, you can always tweet me. And as per usual, there's a poll up right now asking, have we let our veterans down? Cast your vote so I know what you, the nation, really thinks, and we'll get some of your views at the end of the programme as well. Now, after the break, fears over furlough fraud as it's reported that companies set up after the scheme have actually gone on to claim millions. We'll be talking about that next. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. It was set up as a job retention programme during the first COVID lockdown, and the furlough scheme has been hailed a success at staving off a wave of job losses. However, it was always going to be difficult to protect a scheme set up in emergency conditions from frauds and opportunists. Well, today, the Times newspaper reports that hundreds of companies which started trading after furlough was introduced have claimed nearly £27 million from the taxpayer. It also found that around 340 firms registered to just 5 addresses in London were established on or after March the 1st last year. Well, let's talk now to Darwin Friend, who is a policy analyst for the Taxpayers Alliance. Oh, this seems pretty suspicious, doesn't it? Some people have gamed the system, haven't they? I don't think we can hear Darwin just there. We're going to try and reconnect with him and make sure we can hear the very salient points he has to make. But just to remind you, we will be talking about the fact that many companies set up after the COVID furlough scheme was established have been claiming money from the taxpayers. We'll be on to that just shortly after the news.
Good afternoon. Your news headlines this hour. As it is, of course, Armistice Day today, and the Duchess of Cornwall has joined millions of people observing 2 minutes silence. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, people across the UK paused to honour those who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. Border Force officers have intercepted at least 25 migrant boats attempting to cross the Channel today. Up to 50 people were on board each vessel. It's been reported that 4 small boats have also made it to shore, landing on beaches in Deal in Kent. The funeral's been held for Northern Ireland veteran Dennis Hutchings. Hundreds of mourners lined a road in Plymouth, applauding, cheering and saluting the coffin as it arrived to the church, escorted by bikers. The 80-year-old died of COVID last month. Stephen Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambitious plans influenced his decision to become the club's new head coach. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. And those are your latest news headlines. I'm back in half an hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, welcome back. Now let's go back to that story reported in the Times newspaper that hundreds of companies which started trading after furlough was introduced have claimed nearly £27 million from the taxpayer. The Times newspaper also found that around 340 firms were registered to just 5 addresses in London and were established on or after March the 1st last year. Well, I'm told we can now speak to Darwin Fend, who is a policy analyst for the Taxpayers Alliance. Welcome, Darwin. I mean, this does seem like fraud on a fairly industrial scale, doesn't it? Do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show, Alex. And yeah, I think it potentially could be. I mean, I think taxpayers will find it quite alarming that the scale of the fraud that's going on when they're going out to work and ultimately having to foot the bill for fraudsters who are fiddling the system. And I think that while they'll understand that the government had to act quickly to ensure that support was given to make sure people were able to continue being paid when their jobs were under furlough, I think they will frankly be disgusted that while they played by the rules, there are people out there creating what could be sham companies, which is defrauding them of millions of pounds. And so fundamentally, I think what has to happen is government and ministers in the future have to impose stricter rules to prosecute and fine those that are doing this so that then public money is being spent on public priorities.
Do you think the government has the capacity now to be able to identify these companies and actually reclaim some of that money, which frankly has been stolen in a time where a lot of people face significant hardship? Indeed, there are a number of people who slipped through the cracks and, you know, when the music stopped playing, didn't have a seat to sit on and didn't get any sort of government backing.
Well, in the Times report today, there has been talk about a new HMRC team that is going to be looking into this with potentially up to £1 billion of fraud. Hopefully they're going to try and reclaim. But of course, for the job retention scheme or the furlough scheme, there was actually reported to be £6 billion of the total £69 billion of cost that was lost in terms of either fraud or error. Now, people often talk about government money as if it's back of the sofa cash, but it's not actually. Someone's got to pay for that. And so I hope that the new team that's being set up in the HMRC and other teams that will hopefully be focusing on this will be able to reclaim some of that money so that then it can be spent on those priorities that taxpayers up and down the country want to see it spent on.
I mean, while I find this wholly unforgivable for people, opportunists, fraudsters, scammers who think that it's perfectly fine to try and make a buck or two out of a crisis, do you think that the government can be blamed for this, given that this scheme was set up at a rush? They were against the clock. You know, all of a sudden lockdowns were announced within, you know, with a week to spare, if that. Businesses had to pull down shutters and close their doors and stop trading. And so there really wasn't much time to perhaps be as to scrutinise all of the applications for things such as furlough and government grants as there might be outside of a crisis.
No, definitely. And I think the speed at which lockdown came in, I think taxpayers and your viewers will understand that there were going to be cases which slipped through the cracks. I think it's more the scale of what's happened. The figures that were released in the Times today were only from December 2020 onwards. And so it actually misses out all of that from the start of COVID through till December of 2020. And so this could actually just be the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problem. And so, as I mentioned at the start, I think really what the government now needs to do is impose stricter punishments to dissuade people from ever doing this in the future. And something we've recommended at the Taxpayers Alliance has been altering the Fraud Act of 2006 by making the falsification of documents apply to, for example, COVID schemes. And so what that would do would potentially impose a punishment of up to 10 years imprisonment for some of the actions that have been going on. And I think that would be one positive step the government could take to dissuade fraudsters from taking advantage of taxpayers in the future.
Darwin, thank you so much for coming on the programme today and exposing £6 billion of fraud. I mean, that's enormous, eye-watering and pretty disgusting. Darwin Friend there from the Taxpayers Alliance. The government is struggling to outrun a stream of allegations over Tory sleaze. Whether it's the Owen Paterson cash for favours row or former Minister Sir Geoffrey Cox making nearly £6 million from legal work in addition to his role as an MP and voting by proxy while doing another job in the Caribbean. Oh, the headlines just keep coming. Today, Chancellor Rishi Sunak told the BBC the government needs to do better than we did last week in handling MP standards. Ministers had backed down after severe criticism of their decision to try to prevent Owen Paterson receiving punishment for his paid lobbying work. Well, will this prove to be a defining moment for Boris Johnson and his cabinet, another damaging blow to his reputation, or will he be able to dust himself off once again? Has the Red Wall populist returned to the ranks of the entitled elite? Well, let's talk to consultant editor at the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Andrew, is this going to be seminal for Boris, do you think? It seems to me like lobby journalists have smelt blood and there's a lot of digging to be done.
Well, there certainly is a lot of digging, and this is an entirely self-inflicted own goal by the Prime Minister. He should have accepted that the All-Party Standards Committee had recommended unanimously that Owen Paterson, a former Cabinet Minister, a brigadier, of course, friend of Boris Johnson's, should be suspended from the Commons for 30 days, quite a serious suspension, because he'd driven a coach and horses through the rules about lobbying for money. It was obvious he'd broken the rules. I suspect, as usual, well, I've written this actually, Boris Johnson didn't make himself fully aware of the detail, went along with this madcap plan by the chief whip, Mark Spencer, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, the leader of the Commons, to change the rules and in the process try to save Paterson. There's been a huge backlash, Alex, not just from Tory MPs, but from the voting public. And this has really, really cut through, which is why we've seen the Conservative Party lead in the polls, which has been around 6, 7, 8 points, disappear altogether in one poll. And Boris's own personal rating has slumped to the lowest since he's been Prime Minister. Deservedly so. I suspect, though, it isn't permanent just yet. These sort of stories, there's storms that blow themselves out eventually, and what will really count is how we emerge from COVID, how the Prime Minister deals with inflation and the looming cost of living crisis. But there is a cost of living crisis looming, Alex, and the Prime Minister can't afford many more scandals like this, because then I think it really could become very serious for him.
Yeah, it strikes me that essentially by not throwing Paterson under the bus, he's involuntarily pulled on a thread which is now causing runs in multiple directions. And it seems to me that unless something is done to revolutionise parliamentary standards, you're going to have a situation where the general public are becoming increasingly sickened finding out about all of this moonlighting and MPs subsidising their salaries. Meanwhile, he could lose support of 80-odd MPs in his own party. Is Andrew still there? He seems to have gone a bit dark. We'll pull off that. I think we've just had a little bit of a tech hiccup. But don't you worry, we have more to come on GB News, and hopefully we'll be able to get Andrew Pearce back. I seem to be blighted a bit today, don't I? Hold on. Andrew Pearce being beamed back in. Fantastic. Well, I was just about to say, it seems to me by not throwing Owen Paterson under the bus, he's now stuck between a situation where voters are going to get more and more peeved at the number of second jobs that MPs have, realising they're subsidising taxpayer-funded salaries anyway. But then, of course, there must be a number of Tories, there's 80-odd MPs who do have these second jobs, and if standards change and they lose that extra income, he could lose their support as well.
Yeah, he's caught in a rock between a rock and a hard place, because this is drawing attention to the gravy train, in which a lot of former ministers, a lot of former cabinet ministers, some MPs who've never had ministerial jobs do very well outside. Think about Chris Grayling, probably one of the worst transport secretaries we've ever had. He's earning £100,000 from a year from a company connected to, guess what, transport. And look at the scandal. The fact is, he has not broken the rules, even though he's earned £6 million. The lawyer working outside the confines of Westminster since about 2009. Now, £6 million is an awful lot of money. When does he find time to be an MP earning just £82,000? We know that he's missed important Commons votes because he's been operating in the tax haven of the British Virgin Islands during lockdown, when we were all supposed to be locked down. The only people who were allowed to travel were people who were on really important business. Was the tax affairs of something to do with the British Virgin Islands a really important issue? No. And how on earth did the Chief Whip, Mark Spencer, give him permission to absent himself from Westminster to go and do this work? This is Mark Spencer, by the way, Alex, who was an architect of the botched, stupid, reckless campaign to save Owen Paterson, was it last week or the week before, which blew up in all of Parliament's face. And the Tory party now is in the thick of a real full-blown spree scandal, because people are saying, how much extra money are they earning? Why aren't they content to earn £82,000 a year, which is what MPs earn? Pretty good salary, when the average age in Britain, the average salary in Britain is probably...
Yeah, it's about a third that. Mark,
the Labour leader, of course, has earned quite a lot of money as a lawyer on the side before he became party leader.
Well, indeed, actually, I mean, all parties, no party is exempt from these accusations, that's for sure. Andrew Pearce, delighted to have you on. We had a bit of a dodgy connection there, unfortunately. We blame his Wi-Fi, not us for once. Now, 1,200 migrants have crossed the English Channel in small boats in the past 48 hours. Yeah, almost 700 crossed Wednesday, with 504 making the crossing on Tuesday. GB News has been told at least 25 small boats have been intercepted in the English Channel today alone. Lifeboats and Border Force vessels are still involved in several rescue operations this afternoon. Last Wednesday, 853 migrants crossed into British waters, the biggest incursion in a single day. An official source told GB News the numbers crossing today may well top that record figure. The number of migrants who have crossed the Channel this year is fast approaching 23,000, almost 3 times the number intercepted during the whole of last year. As our Home and Security Editor Mark White reports, the growing crisis is putting increasing strain on the volunteer lifeboats crews who are now often responding to back-to-back calls.
Well, here at Dover Harbour, another Border Force vessel has just come in. More migrants are being taken up this gangway here for processing. We can see them just towards the top of the gangway here. They're taken to a processing centre which is just round the corner in a white tent there. That's a temporary processing centre. It's being replaced by a £2 million processing centre that is due to open in the coming weeks. That tells you what the Home Office is expecting in terms of more migrants continuing to come across the Channel. And it has been another very busy day of multiple boats coming into British waters and being intercepted by not just Border Force but also by the lifeboaters. We see another group of migrants there making their way up this gangway, having been intercepted out in the Channel. They were brought ashore by the Border Force catamaran Hurricane, and as they make their way up the gangplank, I can see that the Dover lifeboat is also coming into the dockside as well, with a view to offloading the migrants on that boat. Now that has gone to calls related to a couple of boats, we believe, in the Channel in distress. You can see that that boat is absolutely full. They're on the bow, packed out on the bow, on the stern of the Dover lifeboat as well. More migrants sitting down at the stern. For these lifeboat crews, it has been relentless. This is a volunteer service, remember. They give up their time to respond to emergencies at sea, but for them it's been back-to-back calls, day after day, really testing, of course, their resilience and the goodwill of their employers to let them out for effectively all day as they answer one call after another. It is unsustainable. The Home Secretary says that she is determined to get to grips with this particular problem, but so far it seems that everything the Home Office does, talking to France, trying to put more in the way of Border Force vessels out there, is not having an effect. They're still coming, and they're still coming in ever greater numbers.
Well, today we're talking veterans. I'm asking, have we let our veterans down? Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Ollie says the support from the military and military charities is very patchy and provided inconsistently in my experience. Officers and those who live further south than me tend to have better experiences. Teresa says, my elderly clients say the wars were to depopulate, so we let them down and more now. Craig says, yes, they're looking at the state of our borders now and going, why did I bother? Now, could fruit snacks and a nice cup of tea be the answer to staving off dementia? We're going to be asking an expert after the break. But first, let's have a little look at the weather.
Hello again. After a fairly calm day of weather today, I think it's going to get lively overnight. A gusty, blustery day on Friday, with most places seeing a fair few showers. There will be some spots that see some sunny spells, but here's the reason why things are getting livelier. A deep area of low pressure is heading our way. Not quite here yet, certainly across much of England, Wales and Scotland, but rain is pushing into western Scotland and already into parts of Northern Ireland. That rain will spread more widely into northwest England, West Wales through the night. Much of the Midlands, eastern and southern England will stay dry, but everywhere the breeze will pick up. That'll keep the temperatures up. Early on, we could drop down to 7 or 8 Celsius across the east, but by dawn, most towns and cities will be up at double digits. So not a cold start to Friday, but for some a fairly grim start. Rain across Northern Ireland, quite heavy bursts of rain crossing through Scotland as well, and fairly damp over parts of northwest England and North Wales. Then we'll see showers developing almost anywhere through the day, staying particularly dull and damp through central Scotland and across the Northern Isles too. Won't see too many showers across East Anglia and the southeast, and a bit of brightness here. Could see highs of 15 Celsius, but don't forget it will be quite blustery, so feeling cooler perhaps than those temperatures would suggest. Through the course of Friday evening, the rain actually tends to fizzle out, so many places become dry, and slowly the breeze will start to ease also. So Saturday's a calmer day, still quite gusty and quite fresh on those North Sea coasts perhaps, but even here the winds will ease down. Sunny spells on Saturday for Scotland, parts of northern England. For many in the south and the west it will be a cloudy day, but not much in the way of rain, and still relatively mild with temperatures 11 to 13 or 14 Celsius with some brightness across parts of the south. Sunday also a largely dry day, again predominantly cloudy, but we could see some spells of sunshine in a few places. Goodbye.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Eating a so-called anti-inflammatory diet, including fruit, vegetables, tea and coffee, could cut the chances of getting dementia by a third. Well, that's the finding of a study conducted by researchers at Kapodistrian University in Athens, which rated the diets of more than 1,000 older people for anti-inflammatory foods and tracked them over an average of 3 years. Well, joining me now to discuss this is neuroscientist at the University of East Anglia, Dr. Michael Gray. Do you believe in this research? Do you agree that eating fruit, veg, tea, coffee can protect us against dementia?
Yes, I do. It's this has been a long-standing bit of work. The researchers involved are from quite a well-respected group in the United States and Greece. It's quite a large study. I'm a little bit surprised that they're saying that the risk can be reduced by a third. That's if that's correct, I think that's absolutely brilliant. But it's been well known in my industry in neuroscience that eating protective foods, these anti-inflammatory foods, are in fact very good for the brain.
I mean, so these anti-inflammatory foods have been described, certainly in reports, as fruit, vegetables, tea, coffee, but surely they've got to be more specific than that, because that's a huge range of, especially when it comes to fruit and vegetables. Are there specific foods that we should be looking at, or is this more about just eating an all-round, balanced, healthy diet that's best for general health?
Well, it's a bit of both, really. The healthy diet is really important, and particularly the Mediterranean-style diet that we're all hearing about now. We've been hearing about this for years. That's what we're really looking at. Not, I mean, most fruits are good for us. We should be really looking at green leafy vegetables. Wild salmon is particularly good. If you can eat fatty foods, this has a compound called omega-3 fatty acids. Blueberries are fantastic. I have blueberries in my porridge every morning now as a result of research like this. I've been doing it for years. There are some good things on the list. Dark chocolate, so the high percentage of cacao is actually very, very good for the brain. And coffee, but I'll caution everybody there. Coffee really in the morning is what we want, because coffee actually is for those of us that have challenges with sleep. Coffee is, we want to stop coffee intake later in the day. Maybe switch to herbal teas, non-caffeinated teas, that type of thing.
I mean, converse to this, are there certain food products, dietary habits, lifestyle habits that we should be ditching if we're worried about dementia, particularly perhaps if we know members of our family have had dementia or Alzheimer's? Are there things that we should be adapting throughout our lives to protect ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. And it's never too late to stop. The big thing really is well, we group these things as factors that we can change, and then lifestyle, such as lifestyle factors. So changing one's diet, getting more exercise, exercising the brain. So, not sitting in front of the television every night, but instead actually doing exercises that help the brain. Those are all really good for us. There's certain things we can't change. I mean, our biological sex, our age, our education level. These are all factors, but we really need to look at lifestyle, and most of us can do some little things to improve our lifestyle. I forgot to mention stopping smoking if one smokes, and we know that that's all very good for brain health as we're working, and in staving off some of the effects of dementia.
Is it possible to identify people who may be predisposed to dementia? And is the rate of diagnosis and of dementia going up around the Western world?
Yes, it is going up. It is becoming almost a medical emergency. We know some years ago the British government put a lot of money into dementia research, and that's not, or that was for a very good reason. It is going, as the population gets older, dementia is, we are going to see more and more dementia.
So is the increase in dementia, do you think, down to us having an ageing population, or is this also potentially down to having widening waistbands a lot of the time, and the fact that perhaps now in the Western world we're slipping more and more into metabolic ill health, things like obesity, heart disease? Are they interrelated when it comes to things such as dementia?
Yes, it's absolutely, that's all related. I mean, the diet alone isn't sufficient. Exercise is really important as well. We know that diet is very, very good for brain health, and we know that exercise is very good for brain health. When we combine both of those two lifestyle changes, it's actually an even bigger benefit than each independently.
And you spoke a little bit about sort of keeping your brain as an organ sort of well exercised as well. What sort of things do you recommend people do? I mean, you said don't just sit there and passively ingest a load of Netflix, actually actively use your brain. Are we talking things like doing a good old cryptic crossword or playing puzzles, or what sort of things should people potentially look to doing if they want to keep their brains ticking over and into their old age?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned crosswords. People do crosswords as they get older because we're really good at them. One of the last things to go really is language. So if you're really good at crosswords, keep doing them, but maybe do Sudoku every once in a while. These types of brain training games. There are loads of things that we can do. At any time in life, we can pick up a musical instrument and start to learn something new. We can enroll in online free education courses. We can read books. We can read a lot more books. Getting out, being socially engaged is really very important later in life. So there are loads of things that we can do to keep the brain active and stave off some of these effects of dementia.
Dr. Michael Gray, thank you so much for coming on. You'll see here I do a cryptic crossword during the advert break. I'm halfway through today's already. So hopefully I'll have good brain health as I get older. Let's see. Now, you're watching The Afternoon Agenda. Lots more still to come. Well, hello and welcome. If you've just joined me on The Afternoon Agenda here on GB News, I'm Alex Phillips, and this show isn't about news as you know it. Oh no, it's discussion and debate on things that are, or really need to be, on your agenda. Still to come this hour. Is the MP's lobbying scandal about to become a seminal moment for Boris Johnson? We're going to analyse whether the sleaze row will prove difficult for the Prime Minister to brush under the old Persian rug. As yet more lava pours from the La Palma volcano in the Canary Islands, we're going to be asking a volcanologist what could happen next. And on Armistice Day, we really need to talk about our veterans. Have we let the armed forces down? Well, that's the agenda for the next hour, but what's on yours? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me @gbnews. But first, it's time for the news with Polly.
Alex, thank you. Your GB News at 5 o'clock. Millions of people have observed a 2-minute silence today to remember the men and women who've lost their lives in conflict. Marked each year on the 11th hour of the 11th day on the 11th month, people across the UK paused to honour those who died in conflict. The Duchess of Cornwall joining hundreds of veterans at Westminster Abbey today. Armistice Day commemorates the end of the First World War, and services will be held on Remembrance Sunday. In other news today, Border Force officers have now intercepted at least 25 migrant boats attempting to cross the Channel today alone, each carrying up to 50 people on board. It's been reported 4 small boats have also made it to shore, landing on Deal beaches in Kent. There's been an influx of migrants trying to reach the UK in recent days, with 1,200 people crossing the English Channel in the last 48 hours alone. And some breaking news in the last half hour. Yorkshire County Cricket Club have confirmed their chief executive, Mark Arthur, has now resigned. That follows a report that found the former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying. The club's board say they're now looking for new leadership that will be vital in driving the change they need. Tens of thousands of care home staff in England are facing job losses today as COVID vaccinations for carers become a legal requirement. Staff must be double jabbed to work unless they're medically exempt. It's estimated that more than 50,000 current workers haven't received both doses, although nearly half have received a single jab. The move comes as the sector faces severe shortages, with some quitting in advance due to the new policy. Speaking to GB News, Alex Norris, Shadow Minister for Public Health and Patient Safety, said Labour had warned the government not to make this move.
We said to the government we didn't think this was a wise thing to do. We encouraged the government to use the time because this was voted on a number of months ago before the summer, to use the time to engage with trade unions, to engage with professional bodies. They haven't done that, and I'm really worried about the impact that that's going to have on social care and then again on the NHS. But once again, it shows at the very heart of government a lack of strategic planning here, understanding of the real world, and it's all our communities that are going to suffer from that.
Well, the NHS is on its knees and buckling under pressure, according to industry analysts, as waiting lists in England reach a record high. The chief executive of the NHS Confederation says the current situation is unsustainable and patient care is being compromised, while the King's Fund Health think tank said chronic workforce shortages were heaping pressure on overstretched staff. Data from NHS England shows 5.8 million people were on waiting lists at the end of September. That's the highest number since records began. Rotherham Council has introduced new plans to combat child sexual exploitation. It follows criticism from opposition Conservatives who said not enough was being done to tackle child grooming in the borough, which the council and South Yorkshire Police dispute. The 2014 J report revealed that 1,500 children had been abused in the town between 1997 and 2013, with one survivor, we're calling Elizabeth, telling us about the council's plan.
Hoping that there's improvements, and there will be, but because they've been amended, I feel like they've been watered down a little bit more. I hope that Rotherham can make a stand, and I hope Rotherham can heal. Am I 100% sure that's going to happen? No.
Elizabeth speaking to GB News. Well, sport for you, and Stephen Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambitious plans were a factor in him agreeing to become the club's new head coach. The former Liverpool and England captain has left Rangers, who he guided to the Scottish Premiership title undefeated last season. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. And how about this? The latest biodegradable and sustainable product now available just in time for Christmas, glitter. Ahead of Christmas, researchers from Cambridge University have found a way to make non-toxic vegan glitter from the cell walls of plants. Glitter isn't currently environmentally friendly as it's made of toxic materials and contributes to plastic pollution. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
The anguish etched into the faces of soldiers who had served in Afghanistan, who saw colleagues gunned down and killed, who worked to change hearts and minds, to restore the beleaguered nation to some semblance of a peaceful democracy, when with one sweep of a pen, the Oval Office recalled American troops, sacrificing a barely stitched together fragile renaissance to their sworn foe, the Taliban, who they had fought for 2 decades at the cost of trillions of dollars and hundreds of lives. Like pawns on a chessboard, lost to the whims of a supposed higher strategy, exposing the often unfathomable and cruel chronologies of war. How quickly the news cycle changes to leave the aftermath of conflict to those who were there, etched forever into their lives as the rest of the world moves on. But what are those repercussions? And do we, as citizens and civilians, owe it to those who we paid to protect us a decent life after service? Today, on Armistice Day, we really need to talk about our veterans. Well, let's first speak to Army veteran and Defence Policy Associate at the Henry Jackson Society, Robert Clark. Robert, delighted to have you on today. How distressing do you think the chaotic scenes in Afghanistan as troops were sort of rushing out and trying to get in contact with all of those who stood shoulder to shoulder with our service men and women? How distressing would that have been for a number of veterans who served there?
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me. In terms of the recent events in Afghanistan we've witnessed this summer and even most of this year, I think, seeing the scenes flashed up on our screens sort of brought it home that this is a conflict that hasn't really stopped. Those people in Afghanistan are still undergoing tremendous hardship under the brutal Taliban regime. But for those, I think, who served there, a lot of people, I spoke to many veterans and many still serving, and it was this real sense of betrayal from the government. However, I have to say it is important to note that this wasn't a British decision. It was obviously the decision of President Biden, his unilateral decision to withdraw US troops back in April. So really, it was completely inevitable that Britain would follow suit. The Defence Secretary did try and rally an international framework or coalition to carry on a presence in Kabul, for example. But obviously, with the lack of US support, especially intelligence and other abilities the Americans bring, it was never going to happen. So I think it's important to keep it in perspective that this was always going to happen eventually. But I think the speed of the collapse of the Afghan government, and then afterwards, what really left quite a striking bitter taste in my mouth really was the almost abandonment of the Afghan civilians who were intrinsic to the British operation for the last 2 decades. So the interpreters, all the people who helped, the people at the embassy, security, they were really sort of left to the wolves in only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks at the end of summer. So that was particularly distasteful for myself to see. But yes, I think it's important to note on this Armistice Day and this Remembrance Weekend, the 100,000 military veterans who served in Afghanistan, they're going to be going through a particularly confusing period this November.
A fairly confusing period for certain veterans with these trials that we've seen of soldiers who served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. It's a very difficult topic, but how appropriate is it when it comes to activities in the theatre of war to then be tried sort of in the context of civilian society?
Well, I mean, it's important to note that, military law, in the military, for example, you're held by 3 types of law: military law, international law, and civilian law. So I think nobody would really argue where an armed forces member breaks the law in that sense. They should be held to account. That's not in dispute. But what is important to note, these legacy inquests that are getting looked back into, 50, 60 years later, evidence collection, the application and the rule of law has changed in 5 or 6 decades to the point where it isn't a valid comparison. Never mind what happens in war is often very confusing. No matter how well trained you may be, there's always that element of confusion and chaos in war. I think everybody can empathise with that. But I really must underline the way that criminal investigations are conducted over the last 50, 60 years has changed so much that they cannot be held to the same account now, half a century later. And I think the recent trial of Dennis Hutchings, whose funeral was actually today in Plymouth, after he contracted COVID in a Belfast hospital trying to clear his name, is absolutely disgraceful on the British government. For those that aren't aware of it, Mr. Hutchings had, I think, 4 or 5 months left to live. He spent those final few weeks of his life trying to clear his name in a Belfast court away from his friends and family, and then contracted COVID and died. It's absolutely abhorrent. There are still dozens of open inquests and inquiries into Northern Ireland veterans from, like I say, half a century ago. We cannot try and prosecute through the same lens that we do in 2021 from 1970s into criminal investigations when there's no new evidence brought to light either. That's the staggering thing. Quite often these legacy cases is people trying to go back over it with a fine tooth comb for people who have already been cleared decades previously. It's absolutely shameful.
Robert Clark, thank you so much for coming on as an Army veteran, of course, from the Henry Jackson Society. Well, former British Army Captain Hattie Haslam-Green joins me now. Hattie, fantastic to have you on. Let's talk a little bit about women in the armed forces. I don't often like going down the road of, talking specifically about what's it like as a woman, but it surely is a very heavily male-dominated environment to work in. Are there concerns over the Army having a macho culture?
I think we can't deny that it's a male-dominated environment, and the fact that women until very recently couldn't go into the combat arms means that actually for the most part, that's not really the Army's fault. It's not been a sort of deliberate ploy to create that kind of ratio. It is the nature of how things have been, and circumstantially, it is a ratio which is much stronger on the male side. I do think there are ongoing kind of discussions, concerns around the treatment of women in the Army, around what working circumstances prevail when you have a very macho, traditionally very male-dominated culture. And the fact that we now do have women serving in the combat arms alongside male counterparts means, this is really something that the Army has got to address. There have been plenty of moments over the course of the last few years where there have been statements made, kind of initiatives that have been driven forwards in the Army to improve the working conditions for women and circumstances for female service personnel. I think we really do need to see some tangible proof now that things are getting better, because there are still far too many stories of situations that really we shouldn't be finding our female service personnel in.
Yeah, I mean, actually, let's stay on this subject, because a particular story that's about at the moment, which is pretty shocking, is the alleged murder of a Kenyan prostitute at the hands of either one or two British soldiers. We don't know. Investigations are ongoing. Does that really, A, surprise you, and does that worry you that this sort of incident could have taken place?
So, look, I don't know the circumstances around the investigation or the alleged incident. It does really surprise me. I mean, I can say absolutely hand on heart, in my 10 years of service, I saw people genuinely endeavouring to do the absolute best job that they could. There are some really, really strict codes of conduct, rules of armed conflict, which are taken extremely seriously by our armed forces. I think it's always extremely unfortunate when the whole body is sort of tarred or tarnished by the actions of a minority or a few. We're seeing something very similar with the Metropolitan Police at the moment. The fact that incidents like that can take place, of course, that's absolutely shocking. But like I said, I don't know the circumstances, and I don't know what's going to come to light when that investigation comes to its conclusion.
Of course. People would say that the two world wars were really seminal moments for women's rights, that having seen women work in factories like my grandma did, building aircraft and, acting as runners with messages tucked down their heels, all the rest of it. After the World War efforts, it was almost impossible to turn around and say women have to go back to the kitchen sink. But do you think today enough is done to shine a light on women's wartime efforts in today's society, in the 21st century? People like you.
I'm obviously biased, so I always think we could talk about it more. I mean, I do think there's a lot of awareness now, certainly around the role of women in the Second and First World Wars, and particularly when you think about like resistance movements, the SOE, and a lot of coverage of corporates, where there have been poppy selling initiatives. People have been really keen to stop and talk, to hear about different experiences, people's stories. I think that's really heartening. Of course, we could always talk more about individual endeavours, and I think women's roles in particular in the Second World War is something that perhaps there's not always a huge amount of awareness about, but I do think we're getting a lot better. But I do think on the whole, around Armistice Day, I feel heartened walking around and just seeing how many people are wearing poppies and are sort of wanting to hear about veterans' experience.
Well, Hattie, you have every reason to be heartened and every reason to be exceedingly proud of yourself as well. And hopefully next time, let's get you in the studio so we can have a good old chat about your experiences and begin to start telling the story of women in our armed forces. That's Hattie Haslam-Green there. Now, Squadron Leader Mark Sugden, who is the officer commanding the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, joins me now. Great to have you on, Squadron Leader Mark Sugden. Tell us about the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight and why that is so important, why we keep those machines running and ticking over so we can do this.
Yeah, so good evening, everybody. The Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. So we're based at RAF Coningsby. We've been... we're almost 65 years old now. And really, I think we're a living reminder of all of those who have served before us and the incredible achievements and the sacrifice that they have made for the freedoms and the way of life that we enjoy today. So we describe ourselves as almost a museum without walls, and throughout the summer, we like to see ourselves as a constant reminder, not only just on poignant days like today, Armistice Day, but throughout the summer and throughout the whole year.
And what are some of those planes like to fly? I mean, they must be. Am I right in thinking that you're normally a Eurofighter pilot? Is that correct?
Yeah, until recently, I was flying the Eurofighter Typhoon, so flying sort of one of the Air Force's latest and greatest on the front line. But now I'm solely on BBMF, and a very different type of flying, to say the least. So obviously, aviation has moved on an awful lot since the Second World War, and very much now, like the Eurofighter Typhoon and the more modern F-35, very much a computer-driven aircraft. The technology is absolutely outstanding, and of course, none of that technology existed back in the Second World War, and the aircraft I fly on BBMF. So it's much more of a raw experience. The aircraft, they certainly don't have anything to help you out piloting wise, and they are a challenge to fly. Very rewarding, but certainly a big challenge.
And does it really bring it back to you quite how unsafe some of these flights were? I mean, yes, we've got fighter aircraft today that can do all sorts of incredible manoeuvres in the sky at breakneck speeds, but those older planes, the exposure must have been incredible. You really have a lot of your body almost sticking outside of the aircraft for a lot of them.
And you're absolutely right. Certainly by modern day standards, you feel exceptionally vulnerable. Nowadays, the aircraft and the weapons that they have, you could be, taking down enemy aircraft and you wouldn't even see them. You could be great distances away. So it's very much more of a standoff type of approach that we go for nowadays. Whereas certainly the aircraft that I fly now, it was very much, as close to hand as you could get by being in an aeroplane, but incredibly close. Hundreds and hundreds of airplanes in a very small piece of sky, are very, very different experiences. Like with all the technologies, they were armed with sort of cannons and guns only, so it made it much more of a sort of a face-to-face environment to what we have nowadays, certainly.
Now, I'm a bit of a military aircraft nut, believe it or not. I know I don't look like one, but I love an air show. And I can't let you go without talking to you about what some of your favourite aircraft are. I mean, I know there's a huge romance around the Spitfire, but is that the one that you would pick out from the Battle of Britain Memorial flight?
And I think you're absolutely right, Alex. When anybody hears of the Few or the Battle of Britain or Fighter Command, it's always Spitfire that seems to take all of the glory. But we have the lovely Hawker Hurricane on the Battle of Britain Memorial flight, and I think sometimes she is the forgotten aircraft of the Second World War and the Battle of Britain. And without her, I think the storybooks would tell a very different story. So actually, I am my heart is with the Hurricane. It was the first fighter that I flew on BBMF, so I'm very close to her. I love to tell her story, and yeah, so she is my personal favourite.
Oh, I love it when people refer to aeroplanes as she as well. I must admit, I'm a bit of a Lancaster girl. If I had to pick, I'd probably go Lanc. Squadron Leader Mark Sugden there, who's the officer commanding the Battle of Britain Memorial flight. And I can't wait for air shows to be back next year. I've missed them 2 in a row now. Well, after the break, the sleaze row rumbles on. But will it be as damaging for Boris Johnson as sleaze scandals have proven to be for past Prime Ministers? Let's try and find out for you. First of all, here's a break. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Chancellor Rishi Sunak has said today that the government needs to do better than we did last week in handling MPs' standards. He was speaking in a BBC interview earlier. It comes after severe criticism of ministers' decisions to try to prevent Owen Paterson receiving punishments for his paid lobbying work. His comments come after a tumultuous week of accusations levelled against his party, with the latest being made against MP Sir Geoffrey Cox. Labour is pushing an investigation into Sir Geoffrey's second job as a lawyer and advisor, accusing him of using his taxpayer-funded parliamentary office to complete outside work. Well, John McTernan is a political strategist who was political advisor to the Labour Party and director of political operations for Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister between 2005 and 2007. He joins me now. How damaging are these sleaze allegations, do you think? Is the Prime Minister between a rock and a hard place where he's going to potentially have to roll some heads, but it could well be at the chagrin of some of his MPs who have second jobs?
Look, I think this is really bad for the government. There's a rule of thumb, isn't there, which is that if a crisis is on the front pages for more than 10 days, then the government really has to start acting, because it's starting to cut through. And you can see that with the opinion polls, which appear to be shifting towards the Labour Party. But you also see it, if you talk to any Tory MP, they're seeing it in their not their mailbags anymore, in their email inboxes. They're getting a lot of people complaining about what's going on. And I saw at the weekend the Prime Minister was complaining about who put him in this situation. I think the thing is, he needs to look in the mirror. He put himself in this situation. Imagine if we went back to last week and the Tories just had a free vote on the recommendation to suspend Owen Paterson. He would have been suspended, and that would have been it. We wouldn't have been talking about this now. Geoffrey Cox's career wouldn't have been, his second job wouldn't have been exposed to such scrutiny, and this whole issue of second jobs. But I think, the Prime Minister is going to have to get a grip of this, and I think it will be some change in the way that second jobs are treated in the House of Commons. There's people on Twitter have been suggesting, well, universal credit has a taper, so maybe for every pound extra above their income as an MP that MPs earn in a second job, they should have it tapered away at 55 pence in the pound, just like people who claim universal credit. You can start to see with that idea, people are thinking about the justice and injustice. And if the government is seen to be not on the side of ordinary voters, that's very dangerous territory for them.
But to ordinary voters, a salary which is almost £82,000 a year, with usually grace and favour residents in London, subsidised transport, it's not half bad, is it? And there'll be a lot of people out there saying, you've got a job, we voted for you to do a job, we're paying for you to do a job, why on earth do you need a second one? Do you think it's about time we just got rid of this moonlighting completely? Or do you agree with the argument that some people making that by doing that you're actually going to prevent a lot of talented people and people with lots of experience in the so-called real world from entering politics?
Look, I think if you look at the ways in which people earn money in a second job, a large number of the people earning large amounts of money are government backbenchers, which suggests that people are getting money because people believe that they have influence or access. I think it's very clear there have to be tighter rules on jobs and payments which are received because of perceived access. I think there's a group of people who are professionals and who may well want to maintain their role in the profession. I think lawyers are one of those, but so are doctors. So will some academics, some lecturers, and I think that people like myself who in whatever job we're in, we contribute to journalism. We write for newspapers, magazines, for online publications. I think it's very hard to say that you couldn't get a fee for writing an article for the Financial Times if you're an MP, but you could if you weren't an MP. So there's some difficulties there. I do think the Committee on Standards in Public Life did a really good report on this issue a couple of years ago. The government could just pick that up and implement it. So it's not as if thinking's not been done for them. And I have sympathy with MPs and the pay that they receive, because over the years, MPs' pay has always been held down in some way to send a signal to the rest of the country about pay restraint. It used to be that the Prime Minister's salary was the same, actually was larger than that of the editor of the Times, and now the editor of the Times is 5, 6, 7 times better paid than the Prime Minister. I do think some balance needs to be restored. It was tried to be, there's an attempt to give extra money to MPs through expenses, and that ended up with a scandal. I think the straightforward thing would be raise the amount of money they're paid, cut down on second jobs, pay their staff better, give them more staff so they can actually do the job for their constituents, and then maybe we could start focusing again on the bulk of MPs who work incredibly hard, work incredibly long hours. And if you ever have a problem, you go to your MP and you ask them to represent you, and by and large they do, a pretty good job for you. We wouldn't have the big discussion about the Windrush generation if it hadn't been for individual MPs raising issues and collectively putting pressure on the government. So huge role for backbench MPs, huge role for all MPs in doing their constituency work. And they must just kind of it must be a heart sinking for decent MPs thinking of going back to the constituency at the weekend, or being back in the constituency now, and getting the kind of people looking at them and wondering if they're at it as well.
Yeah, wise words there, John. I quite agree with you. John McTernan, political strategist. Well, still to come on the afternoon agenda, the latest on that La Palma volcano eruption. It's still spewing lava 5 weeks on, so let's find out what that could cause. And it's time to hear what you think about veterans. Are we letting our servicemen and women down? But first, it's time for the news headlines with the wonderful Polly.
Your GB News headlines at 5:30. The Duchess of Cornwall this morning joined millions observing 2 minutes silence for Armistice Day. On the 11th hour of the 11th day, on the 11th month, people across the UK pause to honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice. In other news, Border Force officers have been intercepting at least 25 migrant boats today attempting to cross the Channel. Up to 50 people are believed to be on board each vessel. It's been reported that 4 small boats have also made it to shore, landing on beaches near Deal in Kent. Yorkshire Cricket Club have confirmed that Chief Executive Mark Arthur has resigned. It follows a report that found former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying. The club's board now say they need to rebuild trust. Rotherham Council has introduced new plans to combat child sexual exploitation in the town. It follows criticism from opposition MPs who said not enough was being done to tackle grooming in the borough, criticism which both the council and South Yorkshire Police dispute. The 2014 J report revealed that 1,500 children had been abused in the town between 1997 and 2013. And Stephen Gerrard says Aston Villa's ambitious plans definitely influenced his decision to become the club's new head coach. Gerrard replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked by Villa on Sunday. That's all from me for now. I'm back for more news at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. 5 weeks on from the start of the eruption of the La Palma volcano, and it's still spewing magma and ash. Homes on the Canary Islands continue to be covered in the ash, and for the second time, red-hot lava has flowed into the Atlantic Ocean. The Cumbre Vieja volcano has been erupting since September. Well, volcanologist at Geo Tenerife, Alexis Schwartz, joins me now. Alexis, I mean, this is fascinating stuff. I spent a long time on Lanzarote over lockdown. What do you think is going to happen next? There have been talks of perhaps the shelf could collapse. That could create tidal waves going all the way as far as Southern America. I mean, is that on the cards? Would that be an overreaction to the current situation?
Yeah, it is an overreaction. This is, although it is a very impressive eruption, it is mild and it's not very violent, and it doesn't have any strong seismic activity associated to it, which could trigger this type of collapse events. So, I mean, I think it is an exaggeration to think that this eruption may lead to that type of catastrophe.
Is much of the island still habitable, or are there risks of noxious gases, of people inhaling some of this ash and the dust that the volcano is spewing out?
Yeah, well, there's always some hazard associated to the emission of these gases. I have to say that at any time the concentration of these gases has reached any high level that would concern the population. So the population have been told to remain indoors when the atmospherical situation, the meteorological situation was adverse. So it was not allowing these gases to be blown away from by the wind. So in any case, I think the situation is well under control. And if there are any concern about this emission or the concentration of these gases, immediately the population are told off. So at the moment, I think the situation is working very well in this sense.
How much did this particular eruption catch you by surprise? I mean, there are plenty of volcanoes in the Canary Islands, but I get the impression that people hadn't necessarily had their eye on this one, but they weren't necessarily expecting it to blow.
True. I mean, obviously, you have to consider that the frequency of eruptions in the Canary Islands is very low compared to Hawaii, for example, the Hawaiian Islands, which have eruptions similar to the one we are having now. And they take place every 3 years or 4 years. And here in the Canary Islands, especially in La Palma, the frequency is about every 50 years. So there are generations who don't see any eruption, and then they think that it's a question of the past. But you have to realize these are active volcanic islands, and the eruptions are going to continue for a long time. This eruption took us by surprise because of the huge volumes of magma being emitted by this eruption. If you compare to the previous eruption in 1971, so it was a very small amount of magma emitted by this volcano. So it took us by surprise, the high magnitude of this eruption, and it's continuing. At the moment, we are into the second month. 2, 3, or 4 months is normal in this type of events, the Canary Islands. So we still don't know how long this is going to take until the eruption finishes. But at present, what we see is what is expected of this Strombolian eruption. So there are periods of more activity, periods of less activity, and periods of more effusive character, like we are at present, with a lot of lavas being emitted. So, but as I say, I insist, it's a normal type of Strombolian eruption. So far, we don't expect anything very different to what we've seen so far.
Alexis Schwartz, thank you so much for giving me an update. I'm very jealous that you've been to see that erupting volcano. I'd be out there in a heartbeat if I was allowed. Beautiful things, volcanoes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, today we're talking about veterans as the UK comes together to remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for their country on Armistice Day. Millions of people across Britain have observed a 2-minute silence to commemorate the contribution of British and Commonwealth military and civilian servicemen and women in the 2 world wars and later conflicts. Held exactly 103 years after the armistice, which ended the World War I in 1918. Our Northwest reporter, Bradley Harris, has spoken to Colin Hughes, a former soldier, at a memorial event in Stockport, about what Armistice Day means to him.
While we were on active service, I lost quite a few comrades. I was thinking of the time when we were in Northern Ireland. I served there for 3 occasions, and it was the shock on hearing that, you know, a comrade had actually died in service in an area where I'd been just a few days before. We were on an exercise in Germany in a forest. Now their forests are miles away from civilization, so it's really black. There's no light pollution at all, and we dug 6-foot trenches because this is in the middle of the night and I couldn't see a hand in front of my face, and I went right down the trench and I tore a cartilage. I wasn't aware of the damage at the time, and they couldn't find anything wrong with me. It was years later when the pain came back, and they realised that the cartilage was torn. But since then, I've had 6 major operations on my knee. I'm obviously on a pension now from the Ministry of Defence, and I must praise the surgeon at the Robert Jones Agnes Hunt Hospital. The surgeon there is a Royal Army Medical Corps officer, and I can't praise him enough for the treatment that I actually got in the hospital. I left after 9 years, and after a short period I found that I was missing the comradeship, and I was missing the army itself, and I did try to re-enlist, but at that time the knee was playing up and I couldn't get back in they wouldn't let me back in the army. But I've met people who have done 22 years, 25 years, and it's really, really difficult for them to adjust into civilian life. Army life, military life is completely different to anything that we experience as a civilian. There's quite a lot of support now. There's the Royal British Legion, there's SAFA, there's quite a lot of support, because we've got a lot of lads now suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and the specialist organisations looking after them as well. So it's very. I mean, these organisations are very, very important to veterans. There's people who are physically injured, and there are those who are now mentally injured, and it's those people that we really ought to be looking after at the moment.
What a beautiful package. Now, for some, commemorating the era of the Second World War is actually a full-time job. In a moment, we're going to speak to a woman whose whole career is dedicating to recapturing the mood of the times. But first, shall we have a listen to her in action? Now is the lead darling of the D-Day Darlings Wartime Choir, Katie Ashby. Katie, so you've basically dedicated your life to keeping alive these incredible wartime songs that meant so much to people now, almost 100 years ago.
I have, and you know what, when I see that, because you very rarely get to watch yourself, I perform and this is just my job, it's part of my everyday life, but to sit and watch it, and especially on a day like today, that I just get so moved, and I can see why I chose this as a career, because in my opinion, there's no music designed to really capture a moment like these songs. And just looking at that now, I remember that being on Gold Beach and Arrow March. Oh gosh, just incredible times that I've had, and I love it. I would never do anything else now. That's it.
And in terms of the back catalogue, is it pretty extensive? We all know Vera Lynn and We'll Meet Again, of course, but how many songs are there in your repertoire?
There's so many. Obviously you've got the classics, We'll Meet Again, The White Cliffs of Dover, Now Is the Hour, I'll Be Seeing You. There's all those songs that were made so popular by Dame Vera Lynn. There is so much more, though, to it. You've got Anne Shelton, numbers by her as well, and Gracie Fields. There's a huge repertoire that we have, but the people want those classics, those Dame Vera Lynn classics. And like I said, we just love performing them. There's no other music in the world to us.
And how did you get into performing this music? I'm going to estimate we're probably around the same age, so you certainly weren't necessarily brought up with it playing in the singles charts.
Well, I think I'm a performer, obviously. I've trained all my life, but I've always had a real good ear and a passion for the wartime music and that music of the 1940s. But it's mainly seeing the reaction that this music brings to people that made me want to do it. Because singing other songs from the vintage years, the 20s, the 50s, as I said, I love it. But it's the 40s era and the wartime music that it really evokes such emotion. And to me, as a job, to be able to do that and to bring back memories for people, that in itself is a privilege and an honour. And then obviously the fact I get paid for it and I love doing it, that's just a bonus. So yeah, it's the best job in the world.
And have you found yourself really exploring that era in terms of what went on during the war, what people's lives were like, the way they might have been thinking and feeling and their daily activities, where they were hiding in bomb shelters or, coming back from the front lines when they were listening to that music or heard that music being performed?
It's a minefield. We, doing our job, we get to perform, we get to sing, but also we talk to veterans, we talk to ladies who were, in the factories and who were waiting at home for news of their son or their husband. We get to speak to the real people of that time, and the stories that we hear are just incredible. And a song, like you said, like The White Cliffs of Dover or We'll Meet Again, they'll remember where they were at a certain point when they heard that song on the wireless and what was happening to them at that time. And that's what really resonates with them. And for us to be able to keep that memory and that moment alive for them, well, we must keep doing it. And that's why the D-Day Darlings do what they do, and we'll pass it on to the next generation. We've got the D-Day Juniors who are also on Britain's Got Talent, and they're the new generation that's learning to pass it on. And yeah, it's all about passing that message on, getting all the information now as a generation while we can, and instilling it into the new generation.
Now, Katie, I would be remiss if I did not ask you to do your day job that you have been called upon this show to talk to us about. And I don't know, maybe you could perform just a little bar of your favourite ditty.
Go on then, I'm not busy today. Well, I should be, shouldn't I?
Tell us about what you might sing and just give us a little bar of it so we can all get that sort of Armistice Day glow.
We'll meet again, don't know where, Don't know when, but I know we'll meet again. Some sunny day, keep smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far away.
Oh, Katie, that was beautiful. I would clap, but I've got a broken hand, so I can't. But you brought a tear to my eye because it really does evoke memories of my grandparents and, you know, wonderful relatives that I've lost along the way. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for coming on this special programme that we're doing today. That's Katie Ashby, who's the lead darling of D-Day Darlings. Isn't she fantastic? That honestly has actually brought a tear to my eye, so don't mind me a minute while I just try and fish that out so I can read the auto cue. Today on the afternoon agenda, we have been talking about veterans, and we have been joined by some seriously special guests. Former of the UK Joint Forces Command, General Sir Richard Barrons, says we will always remember the fallen.
I think there are always going to be needs that haven't been met, and we should recognise that meeting those needs in this country has always been a combination of what the government does through our taxes, what the armed forces themselves do, and what the charitable sector does. And we should recognise that a lot of citizens of the UK have been really generous in the way they support the Poppy Appeal and other service charities. But this will never finish. There will always be veterans who grow old, have different needs, have different mental health and other crises. So we need to make sure that this is a constant, vigilant process.
And next, I really was privileged to be joined by a living hero who was awarded the Victoria Cross for his heroism, Dr. Johnson Bahari. He says we must also consider our present.
It's a very important day for me as a sovereign soldier still in the British Army. Today, we mark 103 years of and celebrate this great day, of the men and women that lay their life down, sacrifice their life for us. And I myself been in a similar position, and I was one of the lucky few to come back alive. Our time in Iraq was not the easiest. Afghanistan was a pretty rough time for us. So although we remember the past, we still need to remember the present.
What an honour to have someone who holds the Victoria Cross join me on Armistice Day. And the CEO of SAFA, the Armed Forces charity, which provides lifetime support to British Armed Forces and their families. Lieutenant General Sir Andrew Gregory, he had this to say.
Are there for those that may, for whatever reason, have a difficulty in their lives, as we have been for 137 years. People in the military are put in very dangerous and challenging circumstances. That is part of what men and women sign up for, and they do it very well. And people will react to the challenges they face and the circumstances they've come across differently. Some will be able to cope, and I think they cope particularly well because of the team spirit that exists in the armed forces, people working for each other.
Well, now that we've heard what our wonderful guests have had to say, it's time for you, the viewer, to have the final word. Ian says a perfect example is when you served 22 years and get a pension and then become unemployed. You have little savings, but are prevented from any unemployment benefits or financial assistance despite paying into it for years. John says our government treats illegal migrants better than our veterans. This has to stop. They gave everything for us and we need to repay them for their sacrifice, and it needs to be done now. Sam says yes, but the biggest betrayal of all is for World War I and World War II troops, in my opinion. Heather says we should aim to have an ex-serviceman in every school to give a male role model to all those children, particularly boys who might not have one at home. Niall says our veterans fought for our freedom. Are we currently free? I think we are, just about. Darren says governments in the UK have let down veterans for centuries, and I'm sure there is not much more support now. Will says charity rarely works. There'd be no need for it if the state helped support. The state needs to provide more to support our veterans. Well, we've had a poll up today, and our poll result on veterans asked you whether or not we're treating them properly. 93% of you say yes and 7% say no. You've been watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips, here on Armistice Day. I dedicate this programme to all those servicemen and women and civilian servicemen and women, past, present and, of course, future, who will make the ultimate sacrifice to maintain peace for our wonderful country. Join me again from Monday, 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. Coming up next, it's Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. But it's goodbye from me. Have a fantastic evening. Bye-bye.
Evening. A lively Friday ahead tomorrow. Fairly gusty conditions. Most places seeing a few showers. Some places having a pretty soggy day. But some spots seeing a bit of sunshine as well. It's all courtesy of this area of low pressure that's moving in and ousting a little ridge of high pressure. These weather fronts bringing bands of rain overnight and the isobars squidging together, which is why the winds will be steadily picking up for most overnight. It's still pretty fine out there this evening across much of eastern England, but patchy rain for Wales, some heavy bursts of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland, and those winds continuing to strengthen. That all adds up to a pretty mild night as well. Early in the evening, we could drop down to single figures across parts of the east, but by dawn, most towns and cities will be at double digits. Most will start grey, though, with outbreaks of rain. Certainly for a good part of Scotland, some heavy rain here. The rain should ease from Northern Ireland, but quite a wet day for parts of northwest England, north and mid Wales. Showers across the south, but a good part of the day here will be dry. We should see some sunny spells, lifting the temperatures maybe to 15 degrees. Generally 12 to 14, but feeling cooler because it will be quite blustery, quite boisterous, particularly when the showers come along. Plenty more of those showers around through Friday evening as well, but they do gradually tend to fade, so it's turning drier as we head into the weekend. Clearer skies across northern Britain will allow a cooler start to Saturday. Still a bit of a breeze early on, quite a fresh breeze at times along those North Sea coasts, but generally a much calmer day on Saturday with sunny spells for parts of Scotland, northern England. Further south and west, quite a lot of cloud. Bit of drizzle is possible through parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures still mostly around or a touch above average, and the winds will be lighter on Saturday, so it'll probably feel a little milder. Mostly light winds on Sunday could allow some fog to form. Fairly cloudy skies, but again, most places will be dry and bright. Goodbye.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.